This is my true story. I drove myself to the hospital at 7 months pregnant for a checkup because my husband said he had an important work meeting. The nurse looked at me strangely and said, "Your husband is here with another woman." I walked to room 237 and opened the door and found him holding her hand while she got an ultrasound. They both froze when they saw me. I placed one photo on the table and watched everything collapse in seconds. Before I tell you what happened, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is right now, and please subscribe so my story reaches more people. I drove myself to the hospital at 7 months pregnant with one hand on the steering wheel and one hand on my swollen belly, feeling our baby kick against my ribs. My husband had told me 2 days ago that he couldn't make this appointment because he had an important meeting at work that he couldn't reschedule. He said he would definitely make the next one and he was sorry, but this meeting was critical for a promotion he was trying to get. I didn't argue with him or get upset because I had stopped being disappointed about these things months ago. Ever since I got pregnant, he had been pulling away from me little by little until it felt like we were strangers, living in the same house. He stopped touching my belly when the baby kicked and stopped asking how I was feeling and stopped talking about baby names or nursery colors. He worked late almost every night and came home exhausted and distant and went straight to bed without even asking about my day. I told myself it was just stress from work or fear about becoming a father or normal pregnancy stuff that couples go through. I parked in the hospital lot and grabbed my purse and waddled across the parking lot alone like I did everything else these days. My feet were swollen and my back hurt, and I was carrying a diaper bag and my purse and trying not to cry about the fact that I was doing this completely alone. Other pregnant women walked past me with their husbands or mothers or partners holding their arms and carrying their bags, and I felt a sharp pain of jealousy and loneliness. I had stopped asking him to come to appointments after the fourth one he missed with various excuses about work. I had stopped expecting him to be excited about the pregnancy or involved in planning for the baby. I had stopped hoping he would transform into the supportive, loving partner I thought I married. Instead, I just added each disappointment to the growing list of ways he had checked out of our marriage since the day I told him I was pregnant. I walked into the lobby and headed toward the elevators to go up to the 3rd floor where my doctor's office was located. I had been coming here every 2 weeks for months now, and the staff all knew me and smiled and asked how I was feeling. Today's appointment was just a routine checkup to measure the baby and check my blood pressure and make sure everything was progressing. Normally, I expected it to be quick and boring, and then I would drive myself home alone just like I drove here alone. I checked in at the front desk like I always did and gave my name to the receptionist. She looked at me and then looked at her computer screen and then looked back at me with this strange expression I couldn't read. Her eyes went wide and her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. She said, "Mrs. Davidson," in this slow, careful voice, like she was confirming something she couldn't quite believe. I nodded and said, "Yes, that's me, and I have an appointment at 10:30 with Dr. Reynolds." She picked up the phone without taking her eyes off me and whispered something I couldn't hear into the receiver. Within seconds, a nurse appeared from the back hallway, looking flustered and uncomfortable and nervous. She walked over to me quickly and said, "Mrs. Davidson, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" My heart immediately started racing because the only reason a nurse would need to speak to me privately before an appointment was if something was wrong. I thought they found something on my last ultrasound, or my blood work came back with bad results, or there was a problem with the baby. I followed her to a small consultation room off the main lobby, and she closed the door behind us. She looked at me with an expression of pity and discomfort and awkwardness all mixed together. I asked her if something was wrong with my baby and if the doctor needed to see me right away. She shook her head and said, "No, the baby is fine as far as we know, but there's a situation I need to make you aware of before you go back to the exam rooms." She took a deep breath and said, "Your husband is here." I stared at her confused because that didn't make sense. My husband told me he had a work meeting and couldn't come to my appointment today. I said there must be some mistake because he's not here with me and he's at work right now. She looked at me with those pitying eyes and said, "No, he's here at the hospital right now, but he's not here with you." She paused, and I could see her struggling with what to say next. Then she said the words that made my blood stop and my whole world tilt sideways. She said, "He's here with another woman." I heard the words, but they didn't make sense in my brain, like she was speaking a foreign language I didn't understand. I said, "What do you mean he's here with another woman?" And she said he checked in 20 minutes ago for an ultrasound appointment in room 237 with Dr. Reynolds, who is also your doctor. She said he's listed as the father on the intake forms, and the woman he's with appears to be pregnant. I stood there in that small consultation room with my hands on my 7-month pregnant belly, trying to process what she just told me. My husband was here at my hospital with my doctor getting an ultrasound with another pregnant woman. The words didn't fit together in my brain in any way that made sense. I asked her if she was absolutely sure it was my husband, and she nodded and said she recognized him from previous appointments when he used to come with me months ago before he stopped showing up. She said he checked in using his real name and insurance and listed himself as the father of the baby this other woman was carrying. She said the woman appeared to be about 4 months pregnant based on the intake information. 4 months. I did the math quickly in my head and realized that meant he got her pregnant right around the time I was 3 months along with our baby, right around the time he started becoming distant and cold and checked out of our marriage. My whole body started shaking, and I felt like I might throw up or pass out or both. The baby inside me was doing somersaults, like she could feel my distress and panic. The nurse asked if I wanted to sit down or if I needed water, or if she should call someone for me. But I wasn't listening to her anymore because my feet were already moving toward the door. I needed to see this with my own eyes because part of me still didn't believe it was real. I walked out of the consultation room and into the main hallway, and the nurse followed behind me, saying something about hospital policy and patient privacy. She put her hand on my arm trying to stop me, but I shook her off and kept walking. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears and my breath coming in short gasps. Other patients and staff members stared at me as I walked past them. A heavily pregnant woman, clearly in distress, moving down the hallway with determination. I found the sign that said rooms 230 through 240 and turned down that corridor. The nurse was still behind me talking, but I couldn't hear what she was saying over the rushing sound in my head. I counted the room numbers as I passed them. 231, 233, 235, and then I was standing in front of room 237. I didn't knock, and I didn't pause to think about what I was doing. I just grabbed the handle and turned it and pushed the door open. The door swung open, and I stepped inside, and the scene in front of me felt like something from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My husband was sitting in the chair next to the examination table, wearing the same shirt he wore when he kissed me goodbye this morning and told me he had an important work meeting. He was holding the hand of a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was lying on the examination table with her shirt pulled up, exposing a small baby bump that looked about 4 months along. The ultrasound technician was frozen mid-sentence, with the wand pressed against the woman's belly and gel smeared across her skin. The monitor next to the table showed a grainy black and white image of a tiny baby. My husband's baby. Not the one currently doing flips inside my belly, but another one. A secret one. One he made with this stranger while I was home alone carrying his child and believing his lies about working late. Everyone in the room turned to look at me at the same time. The ultrasound technician's mouth fell open in shock. The woman on the table looked confused and scared, and my husband's face went completely white, like all the blood drained out of his body in 1 second. Then his face flushed bright red, and then went white again. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Just this strangled, gasping noise, like he had forgotten how to breathe, or like someone had punched him in the stomach. The woman on the table looked between him and me, and her eyes got wider and wider as she started to understand what was happening. Her free hand moved from resting on the examination table to covering her small pregnant belly protectively. She said, "Who is this?" in a high, panicked voice, but I could see in her face that she already knew the answer. She could see my enormous pregnant belly and the wedding ring on my finger that matched the one on his finger, and the horror and guilt written all over his face. I stood there in the doorway of that examination room with my hands on my belly and our baby kicking inside me, and I felt strangely calm. I had suspected something for weeks now. maybe even months, but some part of me had been in denial, hoping I was wrong. Now I was standing in front of undeniable proof that my husband had been living a double life, and I felt almost relieved that I finally knew the truth. I said I'm his wife, in a voice that sounded steady and strong even though I was shaking inside. I said, I'm 7 months pregnant and you are. The woman on the table stared at me, with her mouth hanging open and tears starting to form in her eyes. She looked at my husband and said, "What is she talking about?" And her voice was shaking. My husband still hadn't moved or spoken. He was frozen in that chair, with his hand still holding hers, like his brain had completely shut down. I walked further into the room and let the door close behind me, and the sound of it clicking shut seemed to break whatever spell had frozen everyone in place. My husband finally let go of her hand and stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. He said, "This isn't what it looks like." And I almost laughed, because what else could it possibly look like? He was here at my hospital with my doctor, holding another pregnant woman's hand during her ultrasound appointment. There was literally no other explanation that would make this innocent or okay. He said, "I can explain," and his voice was high and desperate and panicky. The woman on the table was sitting up now and pulling the ultrasound wand off her stomach and wiping the gel off with shaking hands. She was staring at my husband like she had never seen him before, and her face was going through emotions so fast I could barely track them. Confusion, shock, horror, betrayal, anger, all flashing across her features one after another. She said, "You're married," in this disbelieving voice, like she needed him to confirm it, even though the evidence was standing right in front of her. She said she's 7 months pregnant and you're married, and her voice was getting louder and more hysterical with each word. My husband tried to reach for her, but she slapped his hand away and scrambled off the examination table, putting distance between them. She said, "You told me you were divorced, and you showed me apartment listings, and you said we were going to raise this baby together." Her voice broke on the last words, and she started crying for real now. Big sobbing gasps that shook her whole body. I watched this unfold feeling strangely detached, like I was watching a movie instead of living through the destruction of my marriage. Part of me wanted to scream at both of them, and part of me wanted to cry, and part of me just wanted to walk out and pretend I never saw any of this. But I didn't move because I needed to see this through. I needed to hear what he would say and what lies he would try to tell to explain the unexplainable. I had known something was wrong for a long time, even though I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid or hormonal or overthinking things. My husband had changed completely after I got pregnant, and not in normal new father anxiety ways. He became secretive and distant and started working late multiple nights a week. He stopped touching me and stopped asking about the baby and stopped caring about our life together. He came home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine and took phone calls in another room and guarded his phone like it contained nuclear codes. 3 weeks ago, I finally stopped making excuses for him and hired a private investigator using money from my personal savings account that he didn't know I had. I told the investigator I suspected my husband was having an affair and I needed proof before I confronted him or filed for divorce. The investigator followed him for 2 weeks and came back with a thick folder of photographs and reports that confirmed everything I feared and more. There were photos of my husband with this woman at restaurants holding hands across the table. Photos of them going into her apartment building together and not coming out until the next morning. Photos of them at a jewelry store where he appeared to be picking out a ring. Photos of them at this very hospital going to what I now realized were her prenatal appointments. The investigator told me, based on his observations, they had been together for at least 4 months and possibly longer. I had been carrying one specific photo in my purse every day since the investigator gave me the folder. I didn't know when or how I would use it, but I knew I needed to have evidence ready for the moment when I finally confronted him. I thought maybe I would show it to him at home during a calm conversation, or maybe I would give it to a divorce lawyer, or maybe I would never use it at all. I never imagined I would be standing in a hospital exam room, showing it to both my husband and his pregnant mistress at the same time. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photo that I had been carrying around like a talisman of truth. My hands were steady as I walked over to the examination table and placed it face up on the surface right next to the ultrasound equipment. The photo showed my husband and this woman 4 months ago sitting on a park bench with his arm around her shoulders. He was kissing her cheek and his other hand was resting on her flat stomach. They were both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. I watched the woman look down at the photo and saw her face crumble. As she realized what she was seeing, she picked it up with shaking hands and stared at it like she couldn't believe what was right in front of her eyes. I said, 4 months in a quiet, steady voice. I said, that's when you got pregnant, right? Same time this photo was taken. She nodded slowly without taking her eyes off the picture, and tears were streaming down her face, now making dark spots on the paper where they fell. The photo was dated in the corner, showing it was taken in early March, which was exactly 4 months ago. I was 3 months pregnant at that time, dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion, while my husband told me he needed to work late and travel for business. Now, I knew he wasn't working late. He was with her. He wasn't traveling for business. He was taking her to romantic dinners and beach walks and apparently getting her pregnant while I was home alone carrying his other child. My husband was standing against the wall now, looking like he wanted to disappear or melt into the floor. His face was bright red, and sweat was dripping down his temples even though the room wasn't hot. He kept opening his mouth like he was going to say something, but then closing it again because there was nothing he could say that would make any of this better. The evidence was literally sitting on the table in front of us, showing him with his hand on her stomach the same month she got pregnant. The woman was sobbing now, holding the photo and looking between it and my husband, like she was trying to reconcile the man in the picture with the man standing in front of her. She said he told me he was divorced and her voice was broken and raw. She said he told me his ex-wife left him 2 years ago and took everything and he was starting over. She said he showed me apartment listings and talked about getting a place big enough for both of us and the baby. I almost felt sorry for her in that moment because I could see she was a victim too, just in a different way. He had lied to both of us and manipulated both of us and used both of us. The only difference was I had the legal marriage certificate and 7 months of pregnancy, while she had 4 months and a pile of broken promises. She looked at me with devastated eyes and said, I didn't know he was married. I swear I didn't know. And I believed her because the shock and horror on her face was too real to be fake. My husband finally found his voice and started talking fast and desperate, trying to explain or justify or somehow make this situation not be what it obviously was. He said, it's not what you think, and this isn't what it looks like, and I can explain everything if you just give me a chance. But the woman on the table was screaming at him now, asking how he could do this to her, and to me, and to both of his unborn children. She said, you're married and she's 7 months pregnant and you were planning to what? Just keep both of us secret from each other forever. He tried to move toward her, but she backed away and told him not to touch her and not to come near her. She said, you told me you were getting a divorce and you showed me apartment listings for places we could live together. She said you went to my doctor appointments and held my hand and talked about baby names and our future as a family. Her voice was getting higher and more hysterical with each accusation, and I could see the ultrasound technician quietly picking up the phone to call someone. My husband was sweating heavily now, and his shirt was soaked through, and he looked like he might pass out or throw up. He kept saying, I can explain. And this is all a misunderstanding, and you don't understand the whole situation. But there was nothing to understand and no explanation that would make any of this acceptable. He had gotten another woman pregnant while his wife was already pregnant, and he had been maintaining relationships with both of us by lying constantly to everyone. The woman pulled out her phone and showed me text messages from him talking about their future together and how much he loved her and couldn't wait to start their family. She showed me photos of them together at restaurants and parks and her apartment. She showed me a ring, an engagement ring that she said he gave her 2 weeks ago when he proposed. She said he told her they would get married as soon as his divorce was finalized, and she believed him because why would he lie about something like that? I looked at the ring and recognized the jeweler's box because it was the same jeweler where my own wedding ring came from 7 years ago. He probably bought both rings from the same person, using the same smooth lies and empty promises. I wondered how many other women there were, how many other lives he was living, how many other secrets he was keeping. If he could lie this completely to both of us, then what else was he capable of hiding? The ultrasound technician had quietly called security and hospital administration while my husband was trying to talk his way out of the situation. A hospital administrator appeared in the doorway, asking what was going on and why there was yelling coming from the exam room. The woman and I both started talking at the same time, trying to explain the situation, but our words were tumbling over each other. The administrator held up her hand and asked us to slow down and explain one at a time what was happening. I took a breath and said as calmly as I could that my husband had been bringing his pregnant mistress to my doctor for prenatal appointments while I was carrying his 7-month-old child. I said he told me he couldn't come to my appointments because of work meetings, but apparently he had plenty of time to come to her appointments instead. I pulled the photo from the table and handed it to the administrator, showing proof that he had been involved with this woman for at least 4 months. The administrator's face went hard as she looked at the photo and then looked at my husband and then looked at the woman on the examination table. She asked my husband if this was true and if he was listed as the father on both pregnancies. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out because there was no way to deny it with both of us standing right there and all the evidence spread out in front of everyone. The administrator said, "Sir, you're going to need to leave immediately and security will escort you out." My husband tried to argue and said he had a right to be at his baby's ultrasound appointment. The administrator asked which baby he meant since apparently he had 2 on the way. She said hospital policy prohibited him from being at appointments for both patients when it created a hostile environment and emotional distress. She said his access to my medical information would be revoked immediately and he would need to coordinate any future involvement through legal channels and lawyers. Security guards appeared in the doorway, and my husband finally realized he had no choice but to leave. He tried to grab my arm and beg me to listen and let him explain, but I pulled away from him and told him not to touch me. He tried to say something to the other woman, but she turned her back on him and covered her face with her hands. The security guards took him by the arms and led him out of the room while he shouted about how we were both overreacting and didn't understand the situation, and he could fix everything if we just gave him a chance. After he was gone and the room was quiet, except for the sound of the woman crying, I sat down in the chair he had vacated just minutes ago. We were both pregnant by the same man, both trapped in his web of lies and deception, both staring at futures that had just completely shattered. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and we were united in this terrible moment by the betrayal of a man who had promised us both different versions of forever. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We just sat there, processing the destruction of everything we thought we knew. Finally, I asked her if he proposed to her, and she nodded and pulled the ring from her purse where she had put it when she got on the examination table. It was beautiful and expensive looking, probably cost thousands of dollars. I wondered if he bought it with our joint credit card, or if he had secret accounts I didn't know about. I asked her when he proposed, and she said 2 weeks ago at a restaurant, where he told her he loved her and wanted to spend his life with her and raise their baby together. I pulled out a business card from my wallet and wrote a name and phone number on the back. I said my lawyer's name is Jennifer Chen, and you should call her and tell her I sent you. I said we're both going to need good legal representation, and she's the best divorce lawyer in the city. The woman took the card with shaking hands and said, "I didn't know he was married. I swear I didn't know." Her voice was breaking and she was crying again, and I believed her because the devastation on her face was too real. I said, "I know you didn't know because he's a liar and he's good at it and he fooled both of us." I said he told you he was divorced and showed you apartment listings and proposed to you while he was still married to me and sleeping in my bed every night. I said we were both victims of the same man and the same lies, and now we both had to figure out how to move forward. She asked me what I was going to do, and I said I was filing for divorce immediately and going after full custody and child support. We exchanged phone numbers, and over the next few weeks we talked frequently, comparing notes and sharing information. We discovered he had a third credit card neither of us knew about with thousands of dollars in charges. We found out he had been telling his job he was working from home on days he was actually with her. We suspected there might be a third woman, but we never found proof. My lawyer and her lawyer worked together to make sure he couldn't hide assets or income from either of us. Our babies were born 10 weeks apart, both girls, both with his eyes and his smile. We're not friends exactly, but we have a strange alliance built on mutual betrayal and shared experience. We coordinate custody schedules and exchange hand-me-down baby clothes and support each other through the difficulties of single motherhood. And he pays child support for both children from the salary at the job he claimed was too important to miss for my prenatal appointments. Pregnant and alone, I arrived for my checkup only to hear your husband is here with another woman. And when I walked into room 237, they both froze until I placed one photo on the table showing them together 4 months ago and watched his house of lies collapse as his 7-month pregnant wife met his 4-month pregnant mistress at the same hospital with the same doctor, both of us realizing we'd been betrayed.